Hello, my fellow readers. I Dark Symphony 777 with another fan fiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts on the story and any future fan fictions you want me to read or review. And finally, this is my review. This is my opinion. This is not my opinion. It's not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So, we're going back to the beginning. Of sorts. If you follow the channel for any sort of time, or probably just went back into the log, way back, the first fanfiction review I ever did was a story called Yu-Gi-Oh! The Thousand Year Door by Occam's Razor, formerly known as Cyber Commander. What does that have to do with this story? Because I am reviewing not only his most famous work, but probably one of the most famous fanfictions of all time. And I don't mean infamous, like something like, I don't know, My Immortal or Cupcakes or, you know, some of those fanfictions that people think of when fanfictions get a bad rap. I'm talking about one of the most well-known and iconic fanfictions out there, and that is the Shadowchasers story. This is one of the most well-known recursive fanfictions. For those of you who don't know, recursive fanfiction is literally fanfiction written about fanfictions. That's literally it. I think Shadowchasers, the only one that's bigger is Fall Into Question. Fall Into Question is literally a pillar in the fanfiction world. Like it's like Shadowchasers is big, but the Fall Into Question is like freaking ginormous. It's huge. It like even Shadowchasers doesn't hold like a blip to it. Sooner or later, I'm gonna have to review the original Fall Into Question. I reviewed Pink Eyes, but but sooner or later, I gotta get on that story, because that story is freaking huge. But, Shadowchasers. Now, I am a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! I've been a fan since 1999. I'm literally one of the OG fans. I still collect the cards. See? I own Cyber Angels. I'm a big fan of the fairy type. I even joke, like, I'm in like a group where like we're making up custom cards to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh. One of my James is like, sooner or later they need to make an archetype based around the constellations. What about Triatrons? I said the constellations, not a constellation. Oh, you go away. See, look. Hey, look. You could be cute enough to be a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Ah. Mawil's adorable. She's the best Pokemon. But anyway, enough prattling on Pokemon. It's time to get into Shadowchasers. So, oh boy, where do we start with Shadowchasers? There is a lot to talk about with this story, because this story is huge. I mean huge. I know technically, like, there are a lot of stories in the Shadowchasers verse. I'm only going to be talking about the original. I know Cyber Commander did make like a pretty big series, like a couple. There, like each story is like 500,000 words. I don't know how long the shortest one is. I know this one I think was just over 500,000 words. But there is a lot to talk about. So in order to talk about the plot, I kind of have to explain what the world is. So, Shadowchasers takes place during the events of the beginning of 5Ds, i.e. the Turbo Duel World Cup, and of course the Dark Side arc. Long story short, like this is like one of those things that's like really complicated, so I have to go into depth. So all these legendary monsters, like werewolves, vampires, Bigfoot, dwarves, gnomes, all that sort of thing. In this world, they're actually real. They're called shadows, and they basically live normal lives. They're sucked from a different dimension and plopped on Earth, and they lose all their memories and try to make the most out of it. And so this shadow touch, that means someone who's half demon, half shadow, and half human, named Jalal, created an organization called the Shadowchasers, full of people called Awares, people who actually can see these monsters, the shadows, for what they are. Like, okay, you see, like, I don't know, a dwarf. Like, when you think of a dwarf, you think of like a big muscular guy with like a big beard. And it's like normal people will see just a normal guy. He's like, oh, he's bald, but he still has a beard. But a shadow can tell he's a gnome, like he's a dwarf. Like, so they'd be able to tell that, he's not exactly human and stuff like that. And so what Shadowchasers is basically a para-supernatural police force using the power of Yu-Gi-Oh! To make arrests to deal with these shadows, that because since they're like stronger than humans, they have powers, psionic, magic, stuff like that. They're specially equipped to deal with them, and they have contacts in regular police force to make sure that to make sure that no one gets involved outside of the Shadowchasers. It's a big organization, and so they have lots of treaties, and basically the modern day treaty is sort of their version of Trials is a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which means, I caught you. It's like, no you didn't. It's like, I challenged you to a card game. It's like, okay, I could beat you. And basically, if the Shadow Chaser wins, they basically get arrested. But if the Shadow Chaser loses, then the Cryptic can go free. It's more or less a checks and balances thing, just in case anyone might abuse the law, sort of thing, on both sides. So it's like both sides get like a fair chance, stuff like that. And that's more or less, like, there's a lot of minute details because this is a gigantic world. I'm not lying when I say the Shadow Chasers world is huge. You go in Fanfiction, you type in Shadow Chasers, you go to like Yu-Gi-Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh GX, all that. You'll find a shit ton of Shadow Chaser stories. You'll find a ton of them. It's pretty big. But that's more or less the world, like more not so much the plot of this specific story, but more just the world, so we can kind of ease everything in, so I can talk about the plot more in detail. So, the plot stars this character named Miko. What is her? I completely forgot what her name is. What is her? Aiko Michiko. Sorry. I completely forgot her name because I'm so used to in the story her being called Emperor. I completely forgot her full name. Aiko Michiko is a secretary. She's basically a secretary for this guy named Mr. Draco, and she's just normal everything thing until she's targeted by an assassin, a Lamia assassin called Hibani. And she's saved by this guy named Shiriko, who, finds out that she's aware. She can actually see that Hiba is a Lamia. She's aware. And he basically tells her, said, well, I'll give you two choices. Either, one, you join us, we train you so that we can defend yourself and become part of the Shadow Chasers. Or, B, you basically try and live a normal life, and you have all these shadows coming after you to kill you. Like, take your pick. And so basically the story follows Ember as she's trying to train while her, Shiracho, Gears, and Jinx all try and stop this criminal organization run by an illithid called Depend from trying to take over Satellite and stuff like that. All currently, while also in the background, the Darksiders arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds is actually happening. So this story takes place at the same time as that arc concurrently. Happens at the same time. And overall, I really do like the plot. I love every single idea that was implemented, kind of blending in all this sort of pop culture. Honestly, I kind of don't like all the pop culture references. I know it's kind of 2009, and so there isn't much when it comes to lore and creativity. But there was so many pop culture references. That would be probably kind of annoying. How everything works, how everything blends together is great. It's executed really well. The basic chapter structure is basically they talk a little, something happens, there's a duel, and then something happens afterwards. That's basically the long and short of the chapter structure. Not so much the story, but the chapter. More or less, each chapter, the same thing kind of happens. There's always they talk, something happens, there's a duel, something happens afterward. That's it. That's more or less it. It's really cut and dry. And as the plot went on, we're kind of given more world building. We're given more cryptists. That's how I usually call them for the most part. I'm going to call them cryptists from now on. That's just me. We kind of delve into more of the character dynamic, Ember's journey to being a full Shadow Chaser, trying to stop Depend from completing his task. All these little minor details. Like I said, a lot of the core ideas in this story are done very well. For the most part, the plot is actually really well. What falters is the characters, the sentence structure, and the pacing. That's really what this story kind of falters at. And I more kind of liken it in the fact that this story has not aged well. That's the worst thing I could say about the original Shadowchasers, is that the story has not aged well. Like, it kind of has not. It's weird. So, let me explain. Let's start with the characters. We kind of talked about, more or less, about the plot, because, like I said, there was a lot to talk about with the plot, and it's too in-depth that I can't really talk about the minute details. All I can tell you about the plot is Amber gets saved, joins the Shadowchasers, her and the other troop, along with Jalal. They try and stop this villain called Depend from basically taking over Domino while also keeping an eye out for whatever Godwin and the Darksiders are doing. That's more or less it. And then there's also like a little bonus arc at the end. That I'm not gonna talk about that because that kind of be spoiling it. But the characters. Let's start with the good characters. You have Depend. He is the main villain of the story. He's the main antagonist. He's basically an Illithid, Illithids in the story are these cryptids who basically were dimension-conquering demons. They basically use psychic powers to keep everyone in check, and they basically ate brains. So kind of like zombies, not really, but because they were like obsessed with knowledge. And Depend is like, you know what? I remember all of this stuff, all these things. It's like, what can I do differently? And so basically he becomes sort of like a mafioso boss in Japan. Where who tries to do everything unlike the other Illithids, were basically forcibly use psychic powers to keep everyone in check. He's like, I'm just gonna get you to respect me. And I'm gonna earn, and you follow me. I won't betray you, I won't kill you, but I want you to follow me. And he's basically like an old school mafioso boss, trying to imitate do his best Godfather impression. He's a pretty good villain. I think he's all right for what they try to do. The author tried to humanize him throughout the story by kind of making him more than what the stereotype in story was with him. Constantly listening to La Vida, Viva La Vida, or I think that's the name of the song. And also kind of him being paranoid and trying to outsmart everyone. He's good. Then there's his main henchman, Edmund, who is what's called a worm that walks. He's basically a person who sacrifices himself, and he becomes like a living pile of maggots. Think of the wicked worm beasts from old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Think of that, but an actual but shaped like a person. And he's basically a snark guy. He's basically he's just gonna snark every time he shows up. He's ridiculous, over the top, hammy. And over the top. You can't really take this guy seriously, but at the same time you kind of do, because his story is he's kind of bad. They kind of delve into his backstory a little bit throughout the story. He basically rebelled against the gods because his girlfriend died from literally getting crushed by in a meteor shower. And despite the fact it was a 1 in a million shot, he basically said, "I blame you, God!" And so he basically did everything just to get do the middle fingers to the gods. That's it. Yes. Where was I? Sorry, I had to get into a conversation with my mom. Where was I? I talked about Depend, and I talked about Edmund. Yeah, Edmund is a Snark Lord. And then there wasn't really much on the antagonist side that was really interesting with characters. On the good guys, there was Jalal. I do like what the author did with Jalal. He's basically an immortal, half dragon, half human with a lot of snark. He's very he has a lot of dry humor going with him. He's very, very uppity and tight. But it works to his character. In the fact, he's the kind of character that can pull it off and actually be entertaining doing it. There's also a little tip, in the last duel, where he kind of makes an impact. There's even, the hint that, thing with the Shadowchasers, every time when they officially join the Shadowchasers, they get a synchro card based off Jalal. Basically Jalal. And I like the little foreshadowing. Spoilers for this, but I have to talk about this because it's actually kind of funny, but also badass at the same time. Where Ember asked Jalal, said, "How do you keep yourself busy from going mad from going mad from immortality? Because immortality, you're gonna get bored and go mad." And he goes, "I have my ways. I meditate. I do stuff." And then in one of the duels near the end, where Shiricho is doing this cat cryptid. When Shiriko goes to summon Jalal literally pulls out a watch. He's like, and then he disappears, and then he actually appears on the field, and the person he's dueling, who actually saw Jalal do that, is like, wait, what? Oh, wait, what? Wait. And even Shiricho after the duel is like, "Jalal, did you say?" And then Jalal later goes, "There are some secrets that even I don't want to tell you." Wink. So yes, I like to see Jalal flat out say in one of the future Shadowchaser stories, because I haven't read them all yet. Said, "Yes, I do get my knocks off by pretending to be a Yu-Gi-Oh monster and kicking everyone's ass." Yes. I just really like that. I thought that kind of adds a hidden element of humor. It's like, that you know that everything that I told you about, but you don't know everything that I know, sort of deal. And I just like that little character, little moment where he, it's revealed that he is like all the synchro monsters that basically look like him are actually him, and he just goes and he just uses magic to just show up and just be badass. I just thought that was a nice little touch. On the outside of that, we have Boris, who's basically a talking skull, who's like a cook and stuff like that. He's fine. Some of the other characters are fine. You have Shiricho, who honestly is probably the weakest of the main characters. I know this is like the first of a series, so it's very likely his character, we kind of go more in depth with his character if I go farther in. But in the context of just the first story, just the original Shadowchasers, he's very bland. He's very one-dimensional. He's like very much kind of a knockoff Yusei. Like, Yusei is an amazing character, and I just get like so many Yusei vibes. It's not funny. It kind of like makes him a weak character compared to like all the other characters. Like, you have Ember, who basically starts out this the shivering girl, but as we see her kind of grow and become better, she kind of becomes more confident, becomes kind of a hothead who kind of gets Leroy Jenkins into stuff that she doesn't want to do. I have to admit, her character development it's all right. I wouldn't say it's good, but I wouldn't say it's bad. It's just planked down in the middle. Then you have Gears, who's basically the mechanic of the group. He's basically like the stoic guy who's basically the voice of reason. He keeps everyone in check from going overboard with their little ambitions. I do like the fact he is like kind of like the team dad sort of thing. And he provides a nice contrast. Like, that's the big thing I like about these four main characters. These three plus Jinx. They have a good dynamic that because their characters don't really work well but when they're by themselves. But when they're a group, they actually kind of shore up each other's weaknesses. And then finally we have Jinx. Jinx is probably the most developed character of this four. I still don't think she's a good character, mainly because in the details I'll talk about a little bit. She's basically this kind of hot-headed, stubborn person who basically relies a little too much on luck, because she got into a situation where, she basically survived by luck, so she made a luck-based deck. And you have, lots of stuff. She kind of grows and kind of mellows out at the end, and she kind of grows as a person. I do think she's better than like the other three, but she's still not really a good character. She's just all four of them are playing like the better characters are the villains with the pen and Edwin. Those are better characters than the main protagonist. It's just me. But that's it with the characters. Like it's mixed bag. Like I said, it's more on the grounds that this is just the first of a series, rather than anything else. So let's go on. Grammar and pace and sense and structure. Honestly, this is the weird one because I get when it comes to the writing style and what the author wants to do. The author wants to emulate the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. That's basically, if you actually read through the story, it's supposed to kind of read like you're watching an episode of the anime, with each chapter being based on, being its own episode, like being its own little thing, but overall, it's a complete story. And even, you even have little Easter eggs, like all the chapters are named after actual Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Like, for instance, the first chapter of the first story is called Kaiser Coliseum, which is a very infamous card that's kind of been been banned in tournaments, stuff like that, based on how hard it is to kind of figure out how it works. Like each card is based off an actual Yu-Gi-Oh card. So I thought that was kind of relevant to the chapter itself. I thought it was kind of cool. But it's kind of hindering itself when the story follows like a very, very samey formula. And that kind of weakens a lot of the sense and structure and the grammar because you're kind of using the same wording and everything. Like, it worked. Like, I do get what Occam's Razor was trying to do when doing this writing style. You wanted to make the story feel very much like you're watching an actual episode of the anime. The problem is the sense of structure works in an anime because it's a visual medium. You're technically watching how they're reacting, how they're moving, and basically the words are just being what's being said out of their mouth. It doesn't necessarily work in a non-visual capacity due to the fact some people have different ways of reading, have different ways of writing. It's too much of a wild gamble to really rely on making it read like a lot like the anime, to the point where it gets kind of repetitive and it gets kind of boring. Like, there's not really any stakes. Like, even when even the final duel between Siricho and Depen, despite the fact Depen defeated Gears and Jinx, there wasn't really any suspense because the formula was so set in stone that it was going to be like impossible for us to not only take Depen seriously as a villain, but also Siricho as an actual protagonist, because he's just bland, that he kind of just blends in the background. It's more just a perfect storm of like weird decisions in the story making, and that kind of made the story worse than it needed to be. And especially since at the beginning of the story, I'm not joking, the author went ahead and said, "Oh, I want to make duels that don't rely on duelists drawing, like using Pot of Greed or Call the Haunting," and yet literally every single duel he uses Pot of Avarice and Morphing Jar. Okay. I know I don't want to call someone out for hypocrisy, but yeah, that's very hypocritical if you're gonna say, I'm not gonna use these banned cards because I want to follow not only the rules of the anime, but I also want to follow the rules of the actual card game and its ban list at that time. And then you use Pot of Avarice and Morphing Jar in literally almost every single duel, just so the players can have cards in their hands at all times. It's like very... It's actually kind of hypocritical. I'm sorry, but I had to call you on that. But it kind of gets rid of a lot of suspension, gets rid of a lot of this care. Like, when you're trying to adhere to a formula for 65 chapters, because that's how many chapters there are in the story, it kind of gets tedious. It sucks away all the plot, it sucks away all the character development, it sucks away all of the suspense and all the stuff that makes the anime so good, because everyone knows and everyone can agree on that the Darksiders arc of 5Ds is usually regarded as the best Yu-Gi-Oh arc in the franchise. It's either the best arc or it's up there. I think a lot of people can say Battle City was better, art was just as good. It depends on the person. I didn't see all of 5D, so I don't know. I only saw like some parts of the Dark Center arc. That's it. But the repetitives kind of grated on me to the point I just wanted to get it over with. That's honestly the vibe what I got. I really loved the world building, but I did not like how formulaic it was. How formulaic the story was. Pacing. I do think the pacing was fine. I get like this is kind of the flip side of this specific writing style, because on one hand it kind of sucks away, but at the other end it kind of makes certain duels actually more thrilling when the pacing is like very fast paced. It honestly feels like you're watching an actual duel, especially when they turbo duel and they're on the D wheels and they're dueling. It honestly feels like you're seeing an actual duel in written words, and it's actually kind of fun in certain. Like I said, it really depends on which duel and when. There's lots of variables with this. It's such a weird formula of how the writing style and the pacing and everything. It's just very weird. But overall, I do like the ideas. I like core ideas. The pacing is good. Some of the characters I really like, and the world building was phenomenal. I just honestly think the sentence structure and the writing and how everything plays out in that end is very, very bad. Is very, very weak in the fact it takes away a lot of suspense and a lot of thrills, but also keeps some of those thrills with like certain duels. Like Jinx's final duel, for instance, like let's use an example. Spoilers. In Jinx's last duel in the story, she fights a Bogart who basically wants to take over her life, because she likes Jinx's body and stuff like that. And so Jinx is kind of going through a thing where she's thinking of abandoning her luck-based duel to switch permanently to X-Sabers, which actually would have been a good idea if not for the fact we only got this instance near the end of this specific duel. It was a good idea, but it was hampered by the story being so formulaic that we didn't delve into her character enough to say, oh, luck failed me. Now, and she's not really going through this crisis of confidence of herself. And so that actually weakens the moment where she says, if I win this duel, I'm not gonna rely on luck anymore. And if the author went in a little more in depth into that little thing with her kind of struggling with the idea of abandoning her luck deck and stuff like that, then that moment would have actually carried more weight because there was actually substance behind it. You literally had her rely on luck the entire game along with X-Sabers, and then she lost one time to the pen because her luck backfired on her, and then literally at the end of after her duel afterwards, that she said she would abandon the luck thing, it really does come off as hollow because it does not carry as much weight as something like that should have been. If there was more build up to it, like, we had a couple of chapters of her kind of going into herself with her thinking whether or not to abandon the whole gambling mechanic or not, then that scene would have been so much better. But that also shows how much the formulaic writing kind of backfired on the story in certain aspects. Now, would I recommend this story? That's honestly, I'm going to have to basically leave it up to the reader. The story does have a lot of phenomenal ideas. It does have a phenomenal premise. It does have an overarch, in terms of an actual story, it does actually deliver a pretty good story. The problem is, it's so formulaic that it gets boring so fast that any goodwill that I had for the plot, any goodwill I had for the villains, any goodwill I had for the protagonist is kind of sucked away by how formulaic it becomes ridiculously fast. Like, no amount of good ideas is not going to be able to overcome such a rote, boring story. Like, I do think if you're into, like, I do think it's going to be up to the readers. If you like this story, then go ahead, read it. It will be worth your time. But if you want to see a good, fleshed out story, I would give this a hard pass. I would say don't really read it unless, or at the very minimum, just skip the duel. At least skip the duels, unless you find the duel important enough that you want to read it. But I would say just have it be based on your personal preference. If I had to choose, if I would go back and reread the story, I wouldn't, because it just gets boring and it gets very repetitive after a while. It just doesn't. Favorite part, I really did like Edmund, the character of Edmund. I really liked it. I liked him, his backstory. As the story went on, we found out about his backstory. I really liked him. He was very snarky, and he was probably the best written character in the story. Especially since you think he's like an evil villain, but no, he's basically just a very lonely man who's so desperate to rebel against the gods for his girlfriend dying that he's willing to do all these horrible, unspeakable tragedies to be able to properly be able to get in his eyes revenge on the gods for what they did to what he perceived did to his girlfriend and stuff like that. I do like that. I really do like his character. Like I said, another favorite part is the whole premise of it. I think the premise is phenomenal. I know I said that multiple times. The premise is completely phenomenal by itself. The whole idea of all these treaties with Jalal, the Shadowchasers organization, all these, even at the end where he got popular, he started making he did little Shadowchaser files of world building. So that way I said, oh, you want to expand on this story? You can. Here's more ideas for other characters to use. And he even the only card he put restricted on is Jalal himself. Jalal, characters cannot use Jalal unless they're an official Shadowchaser. That's the only rule. It has really good ideas. It has an overall phenomenal idea. The world building is phenomenal. The characters are there. I think they get fleshed out as the Shadowchasers world gets farther along. I don't know. The plot is good. The world building phenomenal. Everything about this is good except for the formulaic writing gets boring. What would I do to fix it? Honestly, it's not. This is just such a classic that I wouldn't change anything. At the very minimum, I do think Occam Razor should just give this. Honestly, just honestly do a remaster of the story. He did what Yu-Gi-Oh! The Thousand Year Door. He rewrit it and made it overall better. I really liked Yu-Gi-Oh! The Thousand Year Door Redux. I think this story is iconic enough that I think as a fitting way to end the legacy. If Occam is considering ever gonna retire from writing fanfiction, I think there would be no better way to end it than literally doing a sort of redux version of the original Shadowchaser. Fill in all the gaps, expand on the characters in that story, expand on the world as much as you can. It would honestly be such a great bookend. Occam's Razor, he used to be called Cyber Commander. He became well known for the Shadowchasers world. What better way to end his time writing on fanfiction.net than a remake of his most iconic story? I think that would probably be the best case. Not change anything about this. The original Shadowchasers can stay, but I would really like to see with how he grew, since he grew up and his writing style became more polished and experienced, I would like to see how he would tackle the story again. I would legitimately be curious on how would he be able to handle it this time, the second go around, especially since the Redux version of Thousand Year Door was such a miles better than the original. It's not even funny. But that is my review of Shadowchasers. I do think if you're into Yu-Gi-Oh, give it a shot. If you're into the whole anime-esque feel of it, go right ahead. If not, then skip it. Like I said, it's going to be up to the reader. But I do really want to see him tackle this original story again. I really do want to see how he would handle remaster. That's it. So this has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.